Hello, welcome. My name is Carolyn Muller, and I am the Director of Member Learning Programs at IFDA, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. Today, we're here to kick off a webinar series with Integrity Technology Solutions designed to focus on the very important issue of cybersecurity. Before our presentation, I wanted to just mention a few housekeeping items. First, you'll notice that you're muted, but that doesn't mean you can't participate today. If you'd like to ask a question of our presenters, please use the question function, which is located about 2/3 of the way down on the webinar dashboard control. You can enter your question at any time during the presentation, and we'll get to as many as we can following the presentation. We are recording this webinar, which will be posted in the webinar section of the IFDA website in a couple of days. So let me introduce, we're excited to hear today from Scott Stevens. Scott is with Integrity Technology Solutions and has over 30 years of experience in technology consulting. He manages a cybersecurity team at Integrity, and for the past 10 years, Scott has focused on developing, implementing, and managing technology security solutions and compliance services for regulated entities in the financial and healthcare markets. Scott is a graduate of the University of Illinois and maintains many industry certifications. Scott is also joined today by his colleague Chad Gesher, who serves as the Director of Strategic Partnership. So with that, Scott, I'm going to hand things over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Carolyn. So we appreciate the opportunity to be here with IFDA today to talk about cybersecurity. We were looking at a number of different ways that we could benefit the member group, and we felt that putting together a seminar series would be a very sound way to really look at cyber policies, look at how companies are protecting themselves from the threats that are out there. So today what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at how to build a strong foundation for cybersecurity within your organization. Why? Well, first of all, IFDA is critical infrastructure. As defined by CISA, that's the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the role of IFDA is very critical, both in food and agriculture and in transportation. There are a number of guidelines that are available, and we want to make the member organizations know of those guidelines and resources that are out there. So we really want to help to build on how to set up a security program within your organization. When we talk about security, security is not just a product. Too often we hear people say, oh, we went out and bought this great EDR product, or we bought this great widget. Shiny objects are just that, shiny objects. Security is a framework. It is a program. It is not just a product. It's very similar to someone going out and buying a brand new driver and thinking, wow, I'm going to go join the tour. Or if you go out and pick up a Detroit pizza pan and I'm going to be a pizza chef. Any one product is not what makes security. It's the overall framework. It's the overall program. So today in this presentation, what I would like to do is, and this is the first of a 4-part series, but we want to introduce the NIST cybersecurity framework. The cybersecurity framework has 5 components: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Today we're going to focus on that first component, identify. When we talk about identify, there are certain objectives that we want to flesh out, to describe, and then also we really want to provide the member organizations, where do you start? How do we look at security, and what do we do with it? So, as I said before, security is a program, not a product. You'll hear me talking about different controls. While I realize that is tech speak, I'm putting on my geek hat here as we talk about controls. Controls are actually the policies, the procedures, and the things that we do to secure your environment, your applications, and your systems. When we look at controls, there's three kinds. There are administrative controls. This is the documentation, the policies, the procedures, the training that you do for your employees, teaching them how to be secure. There are physical controls. As the name implies, that's the locks, the security, the surveillance. That's why you have locks on your doors. Some people put up screen filters so that people cannot look over other people's shoulders. The physical controls also have to do with fire suppression, power conditioning, etc. And then finally, there are technical controls. The technical controls are going to be things like the firewall, your password policies. Do you enforce multi-factor authentication? And we're going to talk about all of these things, knit this together into what is a security program. So the first component of the NIST cybersecurity framework is identify. I would ask, can you map out directions to where you're going if you don't know where you're at? Do you know what devices and systems are in your environment? And I'll be real blunt, I've been in this industry for probably 35 plus years. This is the one area that concerns me the greatest. If you ask me what keeps you up at night, I don't know what I don't know. And what I mean by that is there a device that is on a network or in a system that I'm not aware is there? Did someone at some point open up a port on a firewall and it's still out there, but we don't know that it's open? So identify is a very critical first step when we consider putting together a cybersecurity program. So within the identify function, some of the things that we're going to want to do is we're going to develop a place to store this information. This could be in worksheets, workbooks. It could be documented in reports that perhaps you generate yourself, or if you work with a service provider, they may have some regularly scheduled meeting with you where they provide you a list of, here are all the computers that we're protecting for you. Do you take that and check them off? Do you reconcile and say, okay, all of the machines in our organization have antivirus. They have the right tools so that they can be patched. So we want to go through and we want to identify and understand what our assets are. I'll give you just a quick little story. We were working on an assessment for a business. We found that a company had come in and put in vending machines on their network. Now, these vending machines had network plugs. When the company came in, they simply found an open port. They plugged these vending machines in, and these vending machines were on the standard production network. This is a pretty significant sized business. Digging a little further, we found out that these vending machines had software on them that phoned out to the service provider. So what kind of risk and what kind of exposure does this business have if there are vending machines in on the network that can reach out to the outside world? You know, this provides an avenue to come in. Had this company not gone through this process to really identify what devices and what systems are in place, this would be a pretty significant gap. I'll give you another real quick example, and I'm kind of dating myself, but if anyone remembers when Target was breached, and this was a long time ago. I mean, when I say long time ago, I'm guessing 8, 9, 10 years ago. Well, probably more than that. It's probably 10 plus now. But when Target was breached, there were millions of credit card numbers, personal information, a great deal of information was stolen. This all happened as a result of an HVAC vendor walking in, dropping down a computer to manage the heating and air conditioning systems on their network, plugging that computer in, and now this provides another avenue for a malicious actor to gain access. So within the identify function, we want to understand what assets are there. Now, these assets would include your computers, your servers, your mobile phones, tablets, If you have devices in delivery trucks, we want to make sure we know what assets are out there, what assets belong to the business, how they are used. We also want to consider what threats that are out there that could affect these assets. Are these assets open to the internet? Are they only open to the inside network? So these are questions that we want to consider. As we're looking at these assets, we also want to understand what vulnerabilities might be there on these assets. So for example, let's say you have several Windows 10 computers. Well, actually, let me use another example that I've actually seen quite frequently. When you go through and identify your assets, what if you find Windows 7 computers? What if you find servers that are running Server 2008 or Server 2012? Neither of these three or none of these three products, Windows 7, Server 08, Server 12, receive security updates or patches. These products are end of life. They are going to be fraught with vulnerabilities. There are numerous vulnerabilities where if a malicious actor were to gain access to a system on the environment, they can quickly take control of those systems, they can own them, and they can use those as a bridgehead for other activities. So we want to look at what vulnerabilities are there. And then we also want to look at just the foundation. You know, we want to look at what are our plans, how are we going to address these situations? And this is really the crux of what we're going to do within this identify function. So why is this important? Well, first of all, we don't know what we don't know. So when we consider the identify function, we're going to go look at what are those assets that are out there. And here in a few more slides, we can bring back up that cybersecurity framework. Actually, let me just quickly run back to that because it helps to this cybersecurity framework over on the right side of this page where it talks about identify, protect, detect, and respond and recover. We want to look at the devices in the environment. We want to get a list of what applications do you use for your line of business, for your accounting, for your HR. Any software that you are using, we want to make sure we've got them in a list. We want to look at the networks. Where are you connected? Is it a multi-site organization? Are you a single site organization? Do you have VPNs to connect your locations? But we want to look at all of these networks. We've got to get this reduced to paper. We've got to know what is there. Then the important stuff, the data. Where is your customer information, financial information, HR information? We're also going to look at your users. Do you have user accounts that are still active for people that haven't been with your organization for 6 months or 6 years? We see that too, far too frequently. We see user accounts that are still enabled for people that haven't been there for a long time. And when we look at this framework, I also just want to draw your attention to the bottom of this graphic where it talks about people, technology, and process. You'll notice the left side of this is very technology heavy. We're going to use different tools to do this identification. We're going to use tools to protect systems. Now, if some cyber event happens, that's right there in that detect area. That is when this becomes very people heavy. It takes a lot more people resources once some suspicious activity has occurred to really do some forensic investigation to figure out what's going on. And then if there is a response or recovery needed, that is very people dependent. And you'll also notice process in green across the bottom. That's your policies, your procedures, and your training. And it needs to cover the continuum of cybersecurity. So as we're talking about this identify component, these are the types of things we want to identify. And I may even propose we add a 6th line here, or sixth row, and that may be connections to the outside. As I know, many people use cloud-based apps. So what cloud-based apps or what interconnections to others are important, we want to look at those as well. Running back to where we were on identify. So this identify function does form the foundation for our risk management. We're going to look at all of the assets that are out there. We need to collect these up. And as you start collecting these, you're going to start realizing, oh, there's exposure here because we've got accounts created for people that aren't with us. We've got applications loaded on machines that we don't use anymore. Or you may find that there are applications on machines that are very dated, and out-of-date applications may very well have vulnerabilities. So we just really need to know what is there. This forms the foundation for how we move forward to secure the organization. Based on what we find during this identify step, it also helps to understand how do resources need to be allocated. We know there's a very finite amount of money that can be spent and a finite amount of time that can be spent on security. How do we best prioritize? How do we best allocate our resources to better secure the environment? And we will also use this identification component as a baseline. This is how we figure out what progress looks like. This baseline is going to be the foundation that we use to prepare a management plan. This is your roadmap. Let's look at what are the devices, what is the situation, what are the vulnerabilities, what do we need to fix now, what do we need to fix later, and how can we get through the process. I talked about controls. Now there's three types of controls. There's administrative controls. Again, that is your policies, procedures, documentation, and training. There are physical controls. These are the locks on the doors, the surveillance cameras, just the things to physically protect your equipment. And then there are the technical controls. These are the network policies, the MFA, the passwords, how users are set up. It's the use of technology. So when we look at these controls, we're going to talk about the controls based on your asset management. This is really how we reduce risks. You know, this is controls could be things like encrypting the hard drives. And I'll share with you this morning, we found out a client, a business we work with, had a break-in. I was able to see that at 3:58 a.m., a computer went offline, and that was the point at which it got unplugged and was stolen. So now we need to look at the controls. Was the hard drive on that device encrypted? And what can we do to lock it down so that when that thief, malicious actor, what have you, tries to steal information off that drive, we need to know what can we do to protect it. So this is very important with asset management. And had we not done that identify function, we may not have known the device was there. We may not have known whether the drive was encrypted or not. We may not have known what was on the machine. So this is really part of that asset management. Within the identify function, it also helps on the business environment as a whole. This is where the controls come from for the organization. Do all of your users need multi-factor authentication to log into email? If not, they should. But in the overall business environment, these controls are going to impact how security is applied. This also impacts governance in terms of whatever framework you wish to choose. As I've already shared, I'm a big fan of NIST cybersecurity framework. And also, as a part of critical infrastructure, IFDA members have access to resources, checklists, and information that is right along the lines of what I'm presenting here today. But I really want to make the members aware of the resources that are available to you. We also want to use this identify function during a risk assessment. It's recommended that every organization, regardless of size, regardless of the nature of what you do, performs a risk assessment where you go through this identify step at least annually. Many cases, you may have your own IT teams. This involves setting up and setting aside time at a certain time of the year where you do an intentional risk assessment. Do you do an inventory? Absolutely. Inventory is one of the most important things that you have. You do an inventory from time to time. We also need to do an inventory of your technology, and that is this identify function. So when we consider asset management, I talked about this a little bit before, but this is just creating that inventory of all the hardware, software, networks, connections, remote access, devices. You need to know what you have. Again, the scariest thing in my world, I don't know what I don't know. Identify helps get me over that. Within the business environment, we want to look at what risks are you willing to accept? We need to find out what's there and what risks are there, but then we can have conversations around, are you concerned about a device being stolen? Well, what information's on it? You may find, oh, there's very little information on those devices that are in trucks or in delivery trucks. If something was stolen, this is our exposure. Excuse me. But these are things that we need to understand and plan for. This becomes part of that overall security program. We also just want to look at where the risks are coming from. We'll also consider roles and responsibilities. You know, as we look at these devices, we want to figure out who is responsible. And a little hint here, the IT team, if you have an IT team, should only be responsible for the management of the network monitoring, and perhaps the network backup. Your line of business system should be someone that is an operations person, should have the responsibility for that system. HR, payroll, responsibility for those systems would lie within whoever's ultimately responsible for their roles. So we want to start thinking about systems as it's not just all IT that's owned by the IT team. These applications and systems, we really need input and ownership from other entities within the organization. As we line this up, it really helps to bring the business strategy into alignment with the security for what you're doing. I spoke briefly about a risk assessment. A risk assessment is a very key component, and this is oftentimes the first thing that a business will want to do. When you're looking at your organization, you're looking at identifying what devices do we have, what vulnerabilities are out there, what are the threats that potentially could affect you. A risk assessment helps to do that. As I said before, a risk assessment is something that you potentially can do yourself, or if you have an IT team, they could do it as well. But we need to find that framework, and that is where I'm directing us over to NIST with the cybersecurity framework. There is guidance there already. And as a part of critical infrastructure, IFDA members can gain access to this information. So within the risk assessment, we're going to look at the risks. We're going to look at the devices and identify all the things I've spoken about before. We're going to consider, is this a risk? So when we talk about risk, just another quick little analogy, quick little story that I like to throw in. When you think about a vulnerability is some flaw or some issue that could possibly be exploited. So let's use an analogy here. Let's say a vulnerability is a leaky roof. That's a flaw. It's something that could cause harm. So what if this leaky roof is in the desert in Arizona? How great is the risk? Well, once in a while, quite a bit of risk. What if that leaky roof is in the Pacific Northwest, where it literally rains every day? Well, in that case, there's a great deal of risk. There's a lot of exposure. And we can use this analogy when we think about IT risks as well. In some cases, you're going to see, oh, this device has this great big vulnerability. But we want to look at that and say, okay, what are the chances that that vulnerability is going to be exploited? Is this really a risk? And if it is, we need to do something about it, involving either getting rid of the risk so we can eliminate it, we can fix it or mitigate the risk, or we can transfer the risk. We could buy cyber insurance. That is a method of transferring risk. So we kind of think about what are the risks that are out there? What is our risk tolerance? What's the likelihood, which impacts that risk score? And then we can determine what do we want to do with it. So risk management, when we look at the risks that are out there, we want to tailor this to where that risk is. So we want to have a strategy where we look at, okay, if it's an external risk and it's at this level, these are the steps that we're going to take. If it's an internal risk, and we don't think that that is something that's going to be exploited, that fits into another bucket. When we're looking at these risks, we also want to put the right controls in place. So anyone using Microsoft 365 for your email, it's pretty predictable what those risks are. The bad guys are trying to log in as your account from all over the world. If you have necessary licenses, you can put controls in place to say, we're only going to permit logins if they come from the US. You could be even more stringent and say, we only want to let you log in from a machine that we own and know. Going back to that identify. So once we've identified the machines, we can say, within our organization, we're going to permit all logins as long as the login comes from one of our computers. These are examples of controls. Many of you may already own the software and components that need to be in place for this. It's just connecting those dots. It's understanding the risks, understanding what security can be put in place, and tying those together. And then finally, for risk management, we want to continually monitor. That's the importance of doing this repeatedly. We want to do a risk assessment now. We want to go back and do one perhaps a year from now. That's the reason for that annual risk assessment, so that we can measure improvement. We can better determine what's happening in the organization, and we can better protect the environment. So with the risk, we will go through, we do look at risk assessments. We also want to consider doing just an overall analysis. How are these products used? How do you use your main line of business software? How do you access your main line of business software? And we want to put this really into a business environment analysis. We want to consider, okay, these are the products we use. We understand why we're paying for this, why we're paying for that. And this ties into that overall program. We do want to consider legal and regulatory requirements. Different states have different regulations as far as personal information privacy. So if your customers are individuals, there are certain regulations that we want to be mindful of. As we consider legal and regulatory requirements, do you take credit card? If you do, you're probably familiar with PCI DSS. It's the payment card industry standards. These are the laws that we need to follow, or not necessarily laws, but if you don't follow the PCI guidance, you end up paying a higher fee to your credit card processor. Many cases, businesses are paying a PCI non-compliance. And if you look at your monthly settlement statement with your credit card carrier, you may see $50 or a couple $100 non-compliance, where you're actually charged a fee for not meeting their requirements. So we want to tie this in. This needs to be overarching. This needs to be global. We're going to consider security in the organization. We're starting with this identify, and this becomes a component of analyzing the business environment. So with that, that does take me to a conclusion page, but the things that we really want to get across, IFDA is critical infrastructure. With the movement of food and food products, this is a very significant element to society. As such, there are resources available through NIST, through the cybersecurity framework. There are also other resources available, and that's part of why we wanted to work with IFDA to try to get this information into your hands. Security is a program, not a product. So just please keep that in mind. We definitely want to be thinking about this as a more global. It's not just, hey, we've got antivirus. Well, there's so many threats out there. That's a good step, but that's just one step. We do recommend that member organizations select an established program to follow. Cybersecurity framework would be a good choice. And the first step in this cybersecurity framework, identify, is where we're going to go through and look at what are the devices, applications, networks, data, and users that are out there. We need to get this documented. We need to understand what is there, and then we're going to think about what risks do these different areas have and figure out how we want to remediate those. And as we do this identify, as we think about that risk assessment, please plan to regularly repeat the process. Now, I'll just share with you within regulated organizations, whether this be banks, medical, insurance carriers, investment and financial type organizations, they are required by regulation to do a risk assessment annually or upon significant change. And I think you can understand why. Because we don't know what we don't know. We need to do this risk assessment. We need to go through this identify phase, this identify step on a regular basis so that we have an understanding of what the systems are, what their flaws might be, and how we can fix those. This is the first step to be able to protect from, to be able to detect, respond to, and recover from a cyber incident. So with that, that wraps up the prepared information that I have. I would be happy to open up the floor for questions.
Thanks, Scott. That was great. So now we're all going to run out and do our quick assessments. I think, it's great to note that this is part of a series, right? So we're not going to leave everyone hanging at this sort of assess phase, right? Make us worried about now what do we do? But I think it's such a great stage. But when I think about that sort of assess stage, it often really requires us to really get all of the stakeholders of our organizations together. How do we do that in a way that gets people to, be open and share that information in a way that, it's not becoming fearful, right? That we know that this process is really a way for us to know what we have and be really ahead of the game and be part of the solution versus, holding that information tight. Do you have any recommendations on that?
Well, the first area that I'd want to address is security is a program, not a product. We need to have people to understand that there's no point in time I'm going to say, we're done. Security's done. Every day there are new vulnerabilities. Every day the bad guys come up with a new method to try to exploit us. And so we need to buy in at the top, and this is something where it does take management support to say, we want to be secure. As such, we're going to put a process in place. It does need to include everyone, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Carolyn, because it does require buy-in from stakeholders. This is not something that if someone on this call is an IT person that says, boy, this is what we need to do, unless you have ownership buy-in, unless you have stakeholder buy-in, it is going to be a challenge. And I have seen too many instances of that as well.
Yeah, yeah. Now you talked too about having a lot of different devices. I know for our distributor members, you know, they have a lot of different technologies, as you noted, both in our warehouses, but as well out on their trucks. And those drivers are going into facilities where we probably don't have control over maybe what is happening there. At what point do we need to dive into where those technologies go, or is it just in this identify phase really sort of a needs map of where those devices are going and what they're doing?
The goal with this step really is to find that out. Do we have devices that go to one of your customer sites and connects to their wireless? No, that's not all bad. I mean, we allow people to go to Starbucks and connect to wireless, or McDonald's and connect to wireless. But it does matter that we have the right controls on those devices so that when they are at that customer site, they are protected from threats that potentially could be there. So to that point, this identify phase is where we do want to identify what are our devices, where are they operating. You know, another example, many of the IFDA members have got sales and customer service reps that may be distributed out over a large area. They have their own laptops, they have their own cell phones or tablets, and we need to know that as well, because then we were going to sit down and think about, all right, what controls can we put in place for that salesperson? And our goal is not to interrupt their business flow. You know, we want them to be super productive with their MFA enabled.
Right.
So,
yeah. Super. Well, this I think gives us all a lot to think on. Sort of coming attractions, let's call it that. Chad and Scott are going to be with us at Solutions with one of our distributor members, Kohl's. Kohl's was in the identify stage and had a cybersecurity breach, and so they're really going to share what happens next. And I think the success of having done this identify framework, how that moved them into a good response. Not hopefully no response needed would be the best, but when there is one, you know, how that framework set them up for success. And then as we go throughout this fall and early winter, we're going to continue to talk about some maybe more technical aspects of what to do. But this has really been designed to give each segment of the business a little bit of information on cybersecurity and where we can help. So we're so excited that you joined us today and will be with us at Solutions.
Very much looking forward to it. And as the cybersecurity framework implies, the next steps that we'll be talking about will include protect, detect, respond, and recover. We do try to keep this very much product agnostic. We're not looking to sell any specific products, but we will definitely be talking about the classes of solutions that need to be there. So that's part of what we'll tease as we consider the protect and the detect steps.
Awesome. And this webinar will be downloaded in a couple days and put on our IFDA website, along with some additional resources that Integrity has provided our members. Those will be downloaded for you as well. So look for that in the coming days. Scott and Chad, appreciate you all. And just like to remind all our members that, you know, throughout the year, we have a number of webinars. So continue to watch for those offerings on our page and sign up for those that are relevant to you and interested. And if there's always a topic we don't have, we would love for you to reach out and we'll try to solve that problem for you. So thanks again, everyone. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Take care.